This is Al Fritsch at earthhealing.info. We are going to talk about how and when to protest oil pipelines. It sounds like an easy subject because environmentalists go out in large numbers, especially in 2016 when the Dakota access pipeline was contested in North and South Dakota to a great degree. But really, it's a difficult subject because we do find pipelines to be a mixed blessing. There are times when we need them. We need them to get our water and our utilities, that is natural gas, and perhaps at this day when anyone is sitting in their home, they are using pipelines to some degree. And we know that times that these can go bad on you. When they reused a pipeline there in Flint, Michigan, and then the amount of lead expanded very rapidly into the environment and into the water, and it hurt the children especially. We know that pipelines can bring good things. We need the water. Or they can bring things that could be harmful if it happens that they leak and explode, and that happens at times. We remember in Africa they were piping gasoline that is, and then the people found out that they could tap in and get themselves a supply. Somebody apparently was smoking as they were doing it, and upwards to hundreds got hurt and injured and died. Yeah. Sometimes the pipelines are not needed. We have here in Kentucky, they were trying to take a natural gas pipeline that hadn't been used for quite a number of years and convert it to where they could take the liquids that come off of fracking gas and oil that are not used for fuel, but rather they're used for making petrochemicals, and therefore they become the plastics and other areas of the chemical industry. And they were going to pipe these down to Louisiana, and the people began to object because the materials, if they escaped, they're very harmful and they're very combustible. And they didn't want those passing close to their home through an old pipeline. So pipelines are, well, they're good and they're mixed blessings. They can be bad. What we're talking about here are oil pipelines. Now, utility is one where when you need to get the pipeline through, eminent domain, that means that the government can say for the good of the common good, we will take and have this land that you have to be open to where a pipeline can come in. And therefore your private property rights are now superseded by those of the general public. That's a little different when we're talking about private pipelines that are not for immediate utility purpose. And for that reason, eminent domain does have an important part to play. Some people will say, it will not pass through my property. And therefore, when we talk about oil pipelines, that is a point that we must consider. And especially when they pass through reservations of Native Americans or the first peoples of Canada and First Nations. These people object if they are not in the know of what's going on and haven't been even invited to comment. They can become very upset. And so when we had the Dakota access pipeline of this past year, people became very excited about the fact it was going to cross areas where their water reserves were being held, or it was going to pass through their native artifacts, which are part of their culture. And they didn't like either of those possibilities, and therefore they roused themselves and they got their friends, not only other Indian tribes, Native American tribes throughout the country, but a lot of environmentalists and other people came to their side, and there was tremendous demonstrations. So we know, and that has not been fully answered, either that or the fact that we have another issue, and that is the Keystone pipeline system. I say system because we're really talking about the fourth of four phases of the Keystone pipeline coming from the tar sands of Alberta in Canada. Really, on this, more than the access, we will have to look at a map. And so therefore, we see this map, And up in the upper left-hand corner is the word Hardisty, and this word applies to Alberta, which is the province where the words Keystone comes across. That is the province of Alberta in Canada. That area has the second largest concentration of oil, that is, carbonated materials, oil or gas, of any part of the world. I mean, only the Middle East has one that's greater than this. So we're not talking about a small amount of material. They tell you about that it's not disturbing much land, but it hasn't yet disturbed a lot because there's a lot of potential there for development. Now this brings up the subject. Well, what are they talking about? Isn't it bad to have trucks carry this stuff, or railroads for that matter? One of those had an accident that killed 47 people in Quebec 2 years ago. It's tough when we see these oil tankers coming by, or whether they're by truck and road, or if they're on the rails. So here, the buried pipeline seems to be a better way of doing it. And from a purely conservationist attitude of the piping itself, the transporting itself, then we would have to say that maybe pipelines do have an edge over the other ways of transporting materials. But let's look a little deeper at it. These can leak. 27,000 of them leaked over a 35-year period. And we are laced in this country and in Canada with a number of pipelines already. Well, the Keystone system was to build additional ones. And we're not talking about small amounts. We're talking about 500,000 barrels a day, or up to almost 1 million barrels if the Keystone XL pipeline. Let us look at the map again. The red shows, and it's at a right angle when it comes across the provinces of Saskatchewan and Manitoba, which are what is directly in line there. They're using an old pipeline coming across there and then making a sharp right turn into North Dakota. And then from North Dakota and down through South Dakota and Nebraska, it goes all the way to the border, the southern border, to the town of Steel City, where it branched and went over to Illinois through Kansas, Missouri, and the state of Illinois to Patoka. And therefore, these were refineries used in the Midwest to carry materials that are coming all the way from either Canada or the fields of North Dakota. In place of this, that was the first of their phases. About 5 years ago, it was put into effect. And then a second, which is in yellow, going from Steel City to Cushing, Oklahoma. And why that city is so important is because it's got the terminals for many of the oil fields coming there and then being redistributed from that point. And so that phase was completed. And then the third phase was going from Cushing all the way to the Gulf Coast, which is a little below which says the word Port Arthur, which is on the coast, or Houston itself. And these areas, is what is in blue, is really the third of the great phases, and that's been completed and is in operation. A small extension over to Houston itself is just being put in this year in 2017. So those are the three parts of the Keystone that's finished. The fourth part cuts straight through from Alberta down through Montana and then across South Dakota, Nebraska to Steel City. Actually, that's almost half the distance of what the other was. A note to be said, why don't the Canadians send their materials straight west over the Rockies to British Columbia and then to the coast? Well, there's no refineries that will handle some of that. And secondly, the First Nations people do not like that too much. Also, you're crossing the Rocky Mountains, though it's only about a quarter of the distance that we're talking about coming across the United States with their huge amounts of oil. But anyway, this pipeline, which is listed in green, going through Baker, the town of Baker is shown here because there's a terminal extension being done into western North Dakota in eastern Montana where it picks up oil being fracked at those places. So this goes all the way down to Steel City also. Now this has brought a lot of opposition. The opposition has been there since 2010, and it continued, and eventually asking, because it has to have sort of the permission of the State Department, because it's oil coming across our border, and also the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, which had a lot stronger position against it than the other. Because when you went across in its original way of crossing Nebraska, it went across what is called the Sand Hills. And this is a very delicate environmental area. And it also has the Ogallala aquifer, which has the largest fresh water supply in the nation, if not the world. And it's being used a lot for where 2 million people have it for drinking water, and it's been used for agriculture. And they were afraid that a break in that, and since you're piping so much per day, before they could stop the break, you could have over 100,000 barrels of oil, very thick oil, contaminating the countryside and probably destroying the very aquifer itself in a good portion of it. And so people were upset. And so what the company did, TransCanada, that is doing this, they decided, well, they'll go around it. So there is, even though it shows that line going straight through there, that hasn't been decided even. They put up 9 or 10 different options to try to circumvent going through that Sand Hills delicate area, and it hasn't been decided even to this day. So we're talking about something that was started back in the around 2008 or 9, and it's going quite strongly now to where it, in order for them to put this in by the new President Trump administration's fast track, that it would still require a lot of time and effort, and a lot of people will be involved. A lot of the farmers out there are very interested as to whether they're going to be part of this or not. Anyway, that's the Keystone. Now what's more important than just the fact that a huge amount of oil would be transported? It's dirty oil. We're not talking about the clean stuff that is pumped out in some places, Middle East. We're talking about tar sands oil, which takes a lot more energy, both to bring it out of the ground, transport it, refine it, and therefore it uses, some people say, as low as 13% more, but really it goes up to almost a half again more, depending on how you do the calculations. And therefore, this is adding to the carbon dioxide level of the atmosphere. 1.5 billion tons of this could be done if that $7 billion pipeline is put in and runs for the length of its normal life. We're talking about immense amounts of addition to the carbon dioxide levels that we have. And that's not the most of it. The most is not the environmental problem, it's not necessarily this problem of even connected to emissions. It's the fact that we're tying ourselves into the whole area of fossil fuel economy. Goes back again to a fact that that has been often talked about, and that is that just like it happened to big oil, to big tobacco, where they extended the life when we knew it was harmful to the health, extended the life of promoting tobacco for 30 to 40 years to add to the profits of those companies. This is far bigger. It's not just the health effects of smokers. We're talking about the health effects of our world. If we allow these kind of things to continue with the pipelines that are being added, we could be in for an economy that would extend for another 20 or 30 years, and therefore the rise that we have, the rise of the levels of harm that could be done from carbon dioxide could be, it now is raised almost 1 degree Celsius. Now you'd say that's not much, but it is doing a lot. Now what should we do? That is really the point of this. We know that something very complex is occurring. Environmentalists are fighting it to their end, and 50,000 have pledged that they're going to resist it. What should the average person who reads and hears and sees this, what should they do? And so we come then to our point. We have to know the situation, because a lot of people would say, we need pipelines. Of course we do. Do we need this pipeline? Do we need pipelines that tie us into an economy that will continue for decades beyond what the renewable energy economy that we're seeking to get? Are we going to do something more? Let the public know that right now, 80 times the amount of money that's used for renewables by the federal government is going as resources, tax exemptions, licenses, and other things for the fossil fuel industry. It is heavily subsidized by the American taxpayer. Stop it. That's the first thing we've got to do. That takes petitions. That takes calls to your congressman. And calls have been coming at a very rapid rate when this was being filmed right now, more than ever before. The public is aroused by certain things. It should be aroused by this issue. For this is, we are heading, as the Pope says about climate change, we are heading on a suicidal course. It's also important for us to see, as Senator Sanders says, it's the most important security matter that we have in our world. We have got to stop climate change. And these pipelines are tying us into a cord that's been tying us in as a noose to the fossil fuel industry. So knowing what the situation is one thing. Responding to our friends and relatives, and in the homes even, that pipelines mean more than just economics and safety. They also mean something symbolic of what we're moving to when we ask to go to a renewable energy economy. So those are the two things. Know what's happening, respond publicly to what's happening. Also petitioning, writing letters, doing the things that we need to do as citizens who are concerned about the environment. We need to do these things. Then we have to add another point to it. We have to resist if we have to march, if that's part of what is going to occur, or actually resist the placing of these. And we know that with the President Trump's way of approaching things, in a few days, months, this is going to be moving very rapidly. It has to be slowed down and stopped. We're talking about pipelines that are tying us to the fossil fuel industry because big oil sees this as 1/3 of $1 trillion worth of profits, even though it could cost us our environment to do it. This is an important issue. Never have we had one like this in our world, where it sounds so good to continue what we've been doing because somebody's going to make a profit. But it doesn't sound good if we see the end results. Our grandchildren and beyond will be saying, what did they have on their mind when they continued the fossil fuel economy when the other was already competitive, that is wind and sun, solar, and was actually coming on at a very fast rate. But these others wanted to tie as long as they could into the fossil fuel economy. We've got to see that pipelines have something to do with it and that we can contest those. This is Fritsch from earthhealing.info.